The day a lonely cowboy defended the widow everyone had abandoned. Half of Willow Bend pretended they didn't see it. They saw Abigail Lane, though. People always saw her when they wanted someone to blame. She stepped into Harlan's general store with the careful calm of a woman who expected nothing but the next insult. "I just need flour, Mr. Harlan," she said softly. "On account, if you'll allow it." Mrs. Harlan's scoff snapped through the room. "On account? After what happened at the Lane stable? I'd say that account burned up with the rest." A few men laughed, the uneasy, guilty kind. No one met Abigail's eyes. No one ever did. They never looked at the faint burn mark on her wrist either, where the lantern had burst the night her husband and Jeb Rowland's brother died. They only looked at her like a curse that hadn't been caught yet. "It was an accident," Abigail murmured. "My husband died too." "Funny how you're the only one still walking," a deeper voice cut in. Jeb Rowland, broad-shouldered rancher with old bitterness simmering in his chest, stepped forward between the shelves. "Ain't right you shopping around like nothing happened." Abigail stood straighter, fingers gripping the counter. "I have to eat, Mr. Rowland." "So did my brother." His jaw twitched. "But he burned." He reached for her arm, no full strike, but the kind of grip meant to shame. The room stilled. No one moved to stop him, except the man by the door who'd been hoping to stay invisible. Elias Ward, a quiet cattle hand known only for long hours and longer silences, stepped forward. He hadn't planned to. Trouble had cost him a brother years ago. He avoided it now like a man avoids fire after being burned. But Abigail's stillness, too deliberate, too hopeless, pulled something old and stubborn out of him. "Take your hand off her, Rowland," Elias said. The words were quiet, but they hit like a hammer. Jeb turned, eyes narrowing as he sized up the lean cowboy with dust on his boots and grief in his bones. "This ain't your business, Ward," he growled. "Looks like it became mine." Elias nodded at Jeb's grip. "Let her go." Jeb's fingers tightened once, testing him, then released. "You choosing sides?" "Already did," Elias replied. "Soon as I walked in." For the first time, Abigail looked at him. Not grateful, just startled that someone had stepped between her and the world. "I'll find flour elsewhere," she whispered. "You won't." Elias set coins on the counter. "A sack. On my account." "I can't owe you, Mr. Elias Ward," he said gently. "Cowhand at the Miller place. And you don't owe me anything." Outside, the dusty street felt heavier than the store. Elias kept a respectful distance as they walked, reading the boarded doors, the shuttered windows, signs of a town that judged from behind curtains. "You live by the old stable?" he asked. "By what's left of it." Her voice wavered, but didn't break. "Most folks ride the long way around. Don't want bad luck catching." He understood luck and guilt and nights haunted by things you couldn't outrun. Elias shifted the flour on his shoulder. "Good thing I don't scare easy," he said. A tiny breath, almost a laugh, escaped her. At the charred remains of her fence, Abigail hesitated. The blackened posts, the lonely house, the burned stable told Elias everything the town refused to say about how she'd been left to survive. "You alone out here?" he asked. "Town says it's safer that way." "For them." Elias studied the ruin, then the woman who still stood on it. "Looks to me like you're the one who keeps surviving," he said. He left the flour by her door, tipped his hat, and turned toward his own empty cabin. He meant to walk away and forget it. But as he reached the road, the memory of Jeb Rowland's hand crushing Abigail's arm burned hotter than any old fire. Elias Ward had spent years avoiding flames. That afternoon, he knew he'd just stepped into one and couldn't make himself step back out. For the next 3 days, Elias Ward pretended he was simply riding past Abigail Lane's burned fence line by coincidence. Anyone watching could tell it was no coincidence at all. Elias had spent most of his life working cattle for the Miller Ranch, keeping his head low, keeping his past lower. But after stepping between Abigail and Jeb Rowland in the store, something in him refused to leave her to face the town alone again. The first morning, he found her struggling to lift a broken fence rail. She didn't ask for help. She didn't even look up. But when he set his saddle down and lifted the rail with one arm, she didn't protest. "You don't have to do that," she murmured. "I know," he answered, fitting the rail into place. She watched him a long moment, as if trying to decide what kindness might cost her. By the second day, word had already spread across Willow Bend. A couple of ranch hands at the Miller place called out to Elias when he returned for supplies. "Heard you're riding guard duty for the cursed widow," one laughed. Another added, "Careful, Ward. Folks say that fire followed her." Elias ignored them, but the words lodged somewhere deep, stirring the ache of memories he didn't speak about, his brother dying under a skylit by gunfire and smoke, a moment he couldn't undo, a life he couldn't save. He'd failed once. He wouldn't fail someone again by turning his back. That afternoon, Sheriff Calder Boone, the tired-eyed lawman who'd known Elias since boyhood, rode out to the fence line. "Town's stirring up nonsense," Boone said, reins loose in his hand. "Roland's telling anyone who'll listen that you're being bewitched." Elias almost smiled. "If defending someone is witchcraft, this place is worse off than I thought." Boone didn't smile. "Just be careful. Jeb's got men who'd love an excuse." Elias nodded, but his gaze slid back to Abigail, who knelt by the garden patch, pulling dead roots from soil that hadn't grown anything since the fire. She worked quietly, sleeves rolled, hands steady. A woman used to rebuilding from nothing. That evening, Elias returned from the Miller Ranch with a small burlap sack, coffee, salt, and a tin of salve the ranch cook swore by. He didn't knock, he only set the sack by her door. But when Abigail opened it, she stepped out onto the porch. "You shouldn't bring things," she said. "People will talk." "They already are," he replied. "Might as well give them something true to say." She looked at him then, not with fear, not with gratitude, but with the wary recognition of someone who'd learned the world rarely gives without taking. Later that night, as Elias rode home, he spotted something glinting near Abigail's window. He dismounted, crouched, and found shards of glass scattered across the dirt. Someone had thrown a bottle, its neck wrapped in a strip of cloth. Abigail opened the door at the sound. Her face paled when she saw the glass. "It happens sometimes," she whispered. "Mostly when folks drink." "Not tonight," Elias said. "You're not staying here alone." She froze. "I can't leave my home." "You won't," he answered firmly. "You'll come back to it. But tonight, you stay somewhere safer." Her breath trembled, but she nodded. Elias didn't touch her. He simply stepped back, creating space while still standing close enough to promise he'd guard every step she took. And as she climbed onto his horse behind him, hands uncertain around his coat, Elias realized something unsettling. Protecting her didn't feel like charity anymore. It felt like duty. Like something he should have been doing long before today. Elias Ward had taken people into his cabin before, cowhands caught in storms, travelers needing a night's shelter, but never someone who unsettled the silence the way Abigail Lane did. She entered quietly, hands folded, eyes sweeping the small space as if memorizing exits. She didn't ask where she should sleep. She didn't touch anything that wasn't hers. But the careful way she stood there half inside, half out, told Elias she expected this refuge to vanish at any moment. "You can take the bed," Elias said. His voice came out rougher than intended. "I'll stay by the hearth." "I don't want to trouble you," she murmured. "You won't." The truth was, Elias slept better on the floor anyway. Beds left too much space for dreams. Their first morning together was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Elias chopped wood outside while Abigail swept the porch with slow, precise movements, as if cleaning gave her something solid to hold onto. When she stepped inside with the dustpan, she paused at the iron stove. "Mind if I boil water?" she asked. "You don't have to ask permission," Elias replied. "This place isn't a jail." Abigail's eyes flicked toward the untouched fireplace, the faint scorch marks on the stones. She didn't step near it. Elias pretended not to notice, just as she pretended not to notice how he lingered in the doorway, close enough to watch the tree line, close enough to keep her safe. Over the next days, a rhythm formed, not planned, not spoken. Abigail mended the torn sleeve of Elias's work shirt, her stitches small and even. Elias taught her to ride his gentle mare, Daisy, guiding her hand to the reins only long enough for her to learn, then stepping back so she didn't feel crowded. "You've done this before," Elias said after she managed a smooth turn. "My husband taught me," she answered softly. "Before." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. That evening, they shared supper at the small wooden table. Abigail sliced the cornbread. Elias poured the water. They didn't pray aloud, but both paused, her eyes lowered, his gaze fixed on the cracked plate before him. "You don't talk much," Abigail said gently. "Most of what I've got to say isn't worth hearing." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's not true." The words were simple, but they landed somewhere Elias kept hidden. On the fourth night, Elias stepped outside to bring in firewood. The moon cast pale light across the cabin, and the hairs on his neck rose. Off in the darkness, a horse snorted, too close, too still. Elias moved without sound, years of ranch work sharpening his instincts. He circled behind the barn and found hoofprints, fresh, deep, circling the cabin like a warning. Abigail appeared at the doorway, shawl tight around her shoulders. "What is it?" she whispered. "Tracks," Elias said quietly. "Someone rode close." "Roland?" Her voice thinned to a thread. "Maybe. Maybe not." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "But no one friendly comes this way after dark." Abigail's fingers trembled on her shawl, but she didn't step back. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door." "You didn't," Elias answered. "Trouble was already coming. I just happened to meet it first." A silence stretched between them, heavy, fragile, complicated. "Go on inside," he said finally. "I'll keep watch tonight." Abigail wanted to argue. He saw it in the set of her jaw. But then she nodded. Hours later, while Elias sat on the porch with his rifle resting across his knees and the sky black as old coal, he caught a glimpse of Abigail's face through the cabin window. She wasn't sleeping. She was watching him. And for a man who had spent years believing no one would ever wait for him again, that small, quiet gaze felt like something dangerous. Something like beginning. Sheriff Calder Boone arrived at the cabin before noon, his horse lathered and his face set in the grim line Elias Ward had learned to trust. Abigail Lane stood on the porch with her shawl pulled tight, sensing the heaviness long before Boone spoke. "I've been digging through old statements," the sheriff said, "about the night of the Lane stable fire. Turns out Jeb Rowland knew his brother had been drinking hard that night. Lantern tipped during a fight, those were the first words spoken before the story changed." Abigail went still, fingers tightening around the railing. Boone lowered his voice. "Someone in town finally admitted it. You weren't at fault, Abigail. The fire was an accident." Elias watched the color leave her face. Years of whispered guilt seemed to shift beneath her feet. But before relief could settle, Boone added, "Roland knows the truth is leaking. That makes him desperate. Desperate men don't stay patient." Abigail stepped back as if the very sunlight became too sharp. "Desperate? How?" Elias asked. Boone met his eyes. "I saw two of Roland's hands trailing off the ridge last night. Armed. Watching this place." Abigail's breath hitched, an old, familiar terror rising like smoke in her chest. "We'll handle it," Elias said steadily. "Thank you, Sheriff." Boone tipped his hat and rode off, leaving dust and warning behind him. The attack came hours after sundown. One moment the cabin was quiet, Abigail rolling yarn between her palms, Elias cleaning his rifle by the hearth. The next, a crash split the night. The window shattered, shards scattering across the floor like sharp rain. Abigail screamed before she could stop herself. Firelight flickered across the broken glass, and her body reacted before her mind did, shoulders collapsing, hands shaking, breath breaking fast and uneven. She backed into the corner, eyes wide and unfocused. "Abigail," Elias said, crossing to her in 2 quick steps. "Breathe. Look at me." But her gaze was fixed on the flames, the memory of the burning stable swallowing her whole. A voice shouted outside. Hoofbeats pounded. Another crash hit the cabin door. Elias grabbed her trembling hands, pressing them gently against his chest. "You're here. You're with me. No fires touching you, I swear it." Her breaths remained jagged, but she nodded once, enough for him to move. Elias blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness broken only by the faint glow of the banked coals. Crawling low, he pushed the heavy table against the door just as a boot slammed into it from the other side. "Ward," a voice barked. "Come out and face it." Roland's men. Not Roland himself, but close enough to carry his anger. Elias motioned Abigail to stay low behind the bed frame, then slipped toward the back wall. Years of ranch raids had taught him every board of this cabin, every blind spot. He eased open the back window, dropped into the cold night, and circled quietly through the brush. The attackers never saw him coming. A warning shot cracked through the dark. Then another. Shouts erupted, and hoofbeats thundered away as the men retreated into the trees, unwilling to risk a full fight. When Elias re-entered the cabin, Abigail was huddled on the floor, arms wrapped around herself, trembling but conscious. "They're gone," he said softly. She lifted her eyes to him, tears streaking down her cheeks, not from fear alone, but from the memory of fire that refused to die. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I couldn't. The flames." "You don't owe me sorry," Elias said. "You owe yourself peace. And you're going to have it." He didn't touch her. He simply sat beside her on the floor, keeping watch as she steadied her breath. Outside, the night was quiet again, but nothing about what had just happened felt finished. By morning, the cabin felt smaller, not from damage, but from the weight of what Abigail Lane and Elias Ward had survived. Abigail moved slowly, gathering broken glass, her hands steady, but her breath still shallow. Elias watched from the doorway, guilt and anger tightening in his chest. He wanted to tell her she didn't have to fix anything. But Abigail had lived too long being broken by other people's choices. Repairing things was how she reclaimed herself. A horse approached from the ridge. Elias reached for his rifle, but relaxed when he saw it was Sheriff Calder Boone, the weary lawman who had been the closest thing Abigail had to an ally in Willow Bend. "The men who attacked were Roland's," Boone said as he dismounted. "We've got them in the jailhouse. And more importantly, word's out about the real cause of the fire. Folks are talking." Abigail froze, broom midair. "Talking," she echoed. "Some are ashamed," Boone said gently. "Some are angry at being lied to. But most want to make things right." Abigail's eyes were wide, wary. "People don't fix years of cruelty overnight." "No," Boone agreed. "But some will try." He tipped his hat and rode off toward town, leaving the possibility, just the possibility, of change behind him. That afternoon, Abigail returned to her burned homestead for the first time since the attack. She walked ahead of Elias without speaking, her shawl fluttering like a pale flag in the wind. The charred fence posts still stood, black ribs against the prairie. The house, half rebuilt but fragile, looked like a question that had never been answered. "Doesn't feel like home anymore," she whispered. Elias swallowed. "Does anywhere?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He set down the small toolbox he'd carried. Quietly, almost shyly, he knelt by the front step and began replacing a split board. He didn't look at Abigail as he worked. He didn't want to crowd her or sway her. He only wanted to give back a piece of what had been stolen from her. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. "I know." Elias wiped sawdust from his hands. "But you deserve a doorway that doesn't fall apart when someone steps through it." Something in her broke open at that, something small, tired, and hopeful. "Elias," her voice trembled. "I don't know where I belong anymore." He stood, hesitating. Elias Ward did not speak easily about feelings. Words felt too thin for the things he carried. But this time, silence wasn't enough. "You belong somewhere you're wanted," he said slowly. "And if you're wondering, yes, you're wanted." Abigail's breath caught. "You mean, at your cabin?" "I mean with me," Elias said, meeting her eyes. "That cabin doesn't feel right unless you're in it. And this place," he nodded toward the burned foundation. "It doesn't deserve you alone." She looked around the homestead at the ruin, the dust, the stubborn shoots of new grass pushing through blackened earth. Then she looked at Elias, the man who had defended her when no one else would, the man who kept watch all night instead of walking away. "I'm tired of being alone," she whispered. "Then don't be," Elias said simply. The wind moved through the grass like a quiet blessing. Abigail stepped toward him, slowly, deliberately, and Elias opened his arms as if afraid she might change her mind. She didn't. With her forehead resting against his chest and his hands settling gently at her back, Abigail exhaled fully for the first time in years. "Elias," she murmured, "I think I found home." "You did," he whispered back. "And so did I." Behind them, the prairies stretched wide and open. Before them, the first boards of a new life waited. For the first time since the fire, nothing felt cursed. Nothing felt lost. It felt like beginning.